It's finally here. After a 2-year wait, Hollywood strikes, internal strife, restructuring, and a heap of negative fan backlash, Rings of Power Season 2 has arrived. And right away, they've proven they've learned nothing from the failure of Season 1. We start with a flashback of Adar's portrayal of Sauron. This was mentioned a couple of times in the first season, but now we actually get to see it. And it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Sauron, played by Jack Lowden, the other actor portraying the character, is addressing the survivors of the last Great War. After Morgoth's defeat, Sauron is attempting to rally troops under his new leadership. He does this by giving a little speech with his vision about subjugating all of Middle-earth. He tells them that a lot of orcs are going to die as a result. Honestly, I don't even understand why he would say this. I mean, telling your troops that haven't even sworn fealty to you yet that you're going to sacrifice a bunch of them isn't very smart. I mean, Shrek did this as a joke.
Some of you may die, but it's a sacrifice I am willing to make.
Sauron should be smart enough not to lead with his plans of using the orcs as disposable foot soldiers. But he isn't. And Adar, who we've already established cares about the plight of the orcs, doesn't want them thrown away as cannon fodder. So he betrays Sauron. Instead of crowning him with this evil spiky crown, Adar turns it upside down and stabs Sauron with it. Then, for no apparent reason, every orc in the room decides to turn on Sauron, and they all take turns stabbing him to death. It is evident to me that they were trying to copy the scene from Game of Thrones, where Jon Snow is betrayed and then stabbed to death by the members of the Night's Watch. But while Game of Thrones built to this moment over the course of a whole season, this just happens, and it robs it of much of its impact. Next, when Adar kicks Sauron's ventilated body to make sure he's dead, Sauron arches his back and lets out a scream, and then a blast wave of cold goes out in all directions, freezing the palace and all the land around it. Why? Don't know, but it seems like this is the stronghold that Galadriel and her troops found at the beginning of Season 1. As Adar and his orcs get back to their feet, because though the palace and the land around it were frozen, it didn't seem to hurt any of them at all. But as they get back to their feet, they see Sauron's body is gone. Just a pile of clothes remain, and a bunch of black liquid which pours through the cracks in the floor, down to a cavern below the stronghold. And there it coalesces into a pool of black goop. And then we see the goop pull in and eat a rat and some bugs. It becomes a bad CG goop monster that slowly slithers its way out of the cavern and back out into the world, until it gets to a road, climbs on a passing cart and eats the driver. And then, shock and awe, the slime monster is able to take human form, and it's Charlie Vickers Sauron. Again, there's no context for any of this. No explanation of how or why Sauron can do any of this. We're just supposed to go along with it. New Sauron stumbles his way along until he encounters a group of refugees, fleeing from Adar and his orcs as they start messing with the Southlands. And after a horrendously forced conversation with an old man, Sauron is persuaded to go with the refugees and seek out a new life. They don't get very far though, as the ship they board is attacked by a giant sea creature. Yes, the same one that's in Season 1, which destroys the ship and leaves the survivors on floating wreckage. This, of course, wraps back around to the meeting of half-drowned Galadriel in the middle of the sea. And you know, I feel like I've seen this before. It reminds me a lot of the opening of Finding Dory, the way the second film started on Dory and traced her backstory to the moment she met Marlin in the first movie. And it's here you begin to realize that the writers of Rings of Power have taken a lot of their ideas from animated family films and HBO shows. But that isn't the biggest problem with this opening sequence. The problem is that it exists at all. It retreads stuff that we already know from Season 1, and while it attempts to fill in some of the gaps, it doesn't add anything that might change or enhance our understanding. However, it is an attempt to influence our emotional perspective. They want us to begin empathizing with Sauron and Adar. They want these characters to be morally complicated, with understandable motivations. Seeing Sauron betrayed by those he once trusted is designed to elicit a sympathy response from us, but it's sympathy for the devil.
Please allow me to introduce myself.
The writers of Rings of Power misunderstand the lore and world Tolkien created, the dynamics of good and evil, but I'm going to talk about that more later, as this will be a problem that permeates much of this season. Next, we cut to a chase sequence. Galadriel is pursuing Elrond on horseback, charging through woods and fields. Why, you ask? Well, apparently Elrond took the 3 rings Celebrimbor forged at the end of last season, and ran off with them. How did he do this? When? How long did it take Galadriel to find out, and has she been chasing him all the way from the forge in Eregion? We don't know, because the show doesn't bother to tell us. I mean, who needs details when you have an action chase sequence? For all her efforts, Galadriel isn't able to stop Elrond before he reaches High King Gil-galad, and what follows is equally the most entertaining and most infuriating sequence in Rings of Power thus far. Elrond has reached Gil-galad and explained that not all is well. Galadriel has been less than honest with him.
Elrond just informed me your companion, this Halbrand, was not who he claimed, yet you chose to withhold this from him and Celebrimbor.
Gil-galad comes down on Galadriel pretty hard, and forces her to tell the truth about Halbrand's true identity. Actually, I really like this part of the scene, watching Galadriel get chewed out over her manipulations. twisting under the scrutiny and forced to come clean was cathartic after the way the first season ended.
Now who is this man?
He's Sauron.
And now the truth is out. The king and Elrond know that Sauron has returned. They know that thanks to Galadriel, he's already been in their midst and exerted influence over them. Gil-galad is rightfully angered by Galadriel's attempts to hide it and seems ready to punish her. But when a show like this rises to new heights, it's only to plummet off of them to reach new lows. And here the scene turns from being one of the best to one of the worst. In desperation of getting Gil-galad's focus off her, Galadriel tells the king that Elrond is carrying the newly forged rings. The rings they hope will solve the light dying problem. And her gambit works. Gil-galad suddenly turns all his focus to Elrond and the rings. Elrond protests that they shouldn't trust the rings because Sauron's influence may have already tainted them, a concern that the king and Galadriel dismiss out of hand. Gil-galad and Galadriel side by side demand Elrond turn them over. Now this is framed as an act of desperation. Gil-galad maintains that because of the light of the Eldar dying, the elves will have to leave Middle-earth and leave it to Sauron, which he isn't willing to do. So they will have to use the rings because they have no other hope of restoring the light of the Eldar. But consider for a moment that Gil-galad doesn't know what's causing the light to fade. He doesn't know if the rings will solve the problem. And with Sauron's return, only one thing is sure, that he is somehow involved in all of this. So given all that, Elrond's objections make a lot of sense.
High King, Sauron has not yet amassed that degree of power. These rings may be how he attains it.
His call to proceed cautiously should resonate with someone as intelligent and as wise as Gil-galad. But for some reason I can't figure out. Gil-galad decides to forget Galadriel's actions and joins with her to treat Elrond as a new enemy. Disregarding the danger, they order Elrond to surrender the rings. And to his credit, Elrond does not, instead pitching himself off a cliff and into a river to escape. And somehow he makes it to another location. Elrond is seeking out Círdan. According to Tolkien's lore, Círdan the Shipwright is an incredibly wise elf with a gift of foresight. So of course in Rings of Power, he's nothing of the sort, merely a red herring. See, after Elrond meets with Círdan and explains everything to him, the wise elf agrees that the rings should be destroyed, because of the potential threat they pose, or at least they should be put somewhere out of reach. Meanwhile, Gil-galad writes a letter warning Celebrimbor that his former partner Halbrand is actually Sauron. The king sends off the letter with a messenger, telling of its utmost urgency. Of course, eventually Galadriel figures out where Elrond is gone, and she attempts to confront him again. And again, I like this scene. Elrond makes his case and levels some appropriate criticisms at Galadriel for her actions, saying some things that we the audience have been saying.
Sauron looked inside you and plucked the very song of your soul, note by note. You gave him everything he wanted and then thanked him for it.
But when pressed about the rings, Elrond says he doesn't have them anymore. Círdan does, taking them in a rowboat out into the water, where a scar from a battle with Morgoth left a chasm, the depths of which are unknown. Círdan plans to pitch the rings into the chasm, but whether you know the lore or not, you can probably guess what happens next. As he prepares to throw the rings away, he gets a glimpse of one. In another scene pulled from the Jackson movies, Círdan can't bring himself to destroy them. He returns to the king wearing one of the three. Gil-galad puts on the second, and the third falls and lands in front of Galadriel's feet. She takes it up and puts it on. Yes, it is accurate to the lore that the three who were given the elven rings were Gil-galad, Galadriel, and Círdan, but this isn't how it happened. The show makes the wielders of the ring seem almost haphazard, pure chance, which doesn't agree with the lore, and it doesn't make sense with the logic of the show either. The stated reason in the show to have three rings was to bring balance. If that was the goal, then the elves who bear the rings should be carefully determined by those who most likely embody and sustain that balance, not the first three schmucks who happen to put one on their fingers. But this is what Rings of Power does. Everything is haphazard. Characters like Galadriel, Gil-galad, and Círdan trample what good sense they should have so plot can happen. There are a couple other storylines here. We see a bit of Nori and the Stranger. Their journey isn't going well. They've gotten themselves lost and have been walking in circles, until Poppy somehow catches up with them, carrying a map that she was either given or stole, showing exactly how to get where they're going. We also learn that the Stranger hasn't gotten any better at wielding his magic, and he's having dreams about a staff sticking out of the ground out in the middle of nowhere. We also get to see them eating bugs, because that's the thing we needed in Lord of the Rings. Lastly, we have Sauron, who after menacingly looking over the land of Mordor in all his evil Dark Lord persona, decided to pretend to be a refugee, let himself be caught by the orcs so he could talk to Adar. Halbrand Sauron promises secret knowledge about Sauron if Adar will let his people go.
Let my people go.
Leaving aside the weird biblical reference here,
Let my people go.
Let my people go.
I have to admit I don't understand Sauron's plan. He gets himself caught and beaten up, all so he can make an alliance with Adar, with the promise of delivering something Adar hasn't been interested in, and has no reason to believe Halbrand Sauron can deliver. But again, plot needs to happen, so Adar agrees. He lets a bunch of his captives go, and Halbrand Sauron returns to Celebrimbor, who hasn't gotten Gil-galad's message. There's no reason the message shouldn't have reached the Elven Smith by that point, and we're not told why, except that it's obvious that the messengers were intercepted somehow. So in another instance that shouldn't be possible, Halbrand Sauron enters Eregion. and that is the first episode of Rings of Power Season 2. It has all the worst parts of the first season distilled into a 1-hour serving. The pace is slow, padded with scenes that don't offer much, and filled with characters doing things against their natures. Things happen because they have to happen for other things to happen, not because they make any sense. If this is the tone they're starting with, it doesn't bode well for the rest of the season, and we'll see that in episode 2. The second episode starts with Galadriel having a vision which leads her to believe that Sauron will return to Celebrimbor and make more rings. Again, the characters seem to understand the threat, and at the same time disregard it. Galadriel wants to go to Eregion and check on Celebrimbor, but the king doesn't want to send her. He says once Sauron has gained someone's trust, he can deceive them again. Of course, Gil-galad forgets that Halbrand Sauron also gained Celebrimbor's trust, so he is very much in danger. But Galadriel has a plan. She hopes if she takes Elrond with her, it will be enough to satisfy Gil-galad. But Elrond, who has quickly become one of my favorite characters, stands up to Galadriel, again confronting her for her part in what has happened. Galadriel teeters, trying to deny her responsibility but also admitting that she was deceived once. She seems to understand that she is compromised but refuses to fully admit it, which does nothing to redeem her. In a moment of doubt, Elrond seeks out Círdan again, and as I mentioned before, this is not the Círdan of Tolkien lore. Instead of being a wise, clairvoyant leader, he is a foolish elitist who seems to think the elves can take what evil created and use it for good. But this conversation influences Elrond, so he goes to see Gil-galad, and Gil-galad appoints Elrond as the commander of an expedition to Eregion, because they've had no response from Celebrimbor and they're getting worried. And as we knew, Gil-galad's messengers were intercepted and killed, though we don't know by whom yet. The interesting thing here is that Elrond now actually has authority over Galadriel. For now. We'll see how long that lasts. The Harfoots and the Stranger find out they're being tracked by a group of bad guys, and they decide to leave the rocky mountain path they've been on in favor of a desert shortcut. Now, I'm no tracking expert, but common sense would seem to indicate that it would be far easier to follow someone's trail through sand than through rock. Sand leaves footprints where rock doesn't. It is far easier to spot someone in a wide open plain than in a hilly rocky area filled with places to hide. But I guess that's just me, because the writers, and by extension the characters, seem to think that the desert path will somehow be safer. Which of course it isn't. These guys who have been tracking them work for the same evil people that employed the female ring race in last season. They eventually catch up with the Harfoots and the Stranger, but the Stranger randomly finds a staff appearing between cuts and uses it to summon a tornado, which blows the bad guys away, but also blows Dori and Poppy away. Oops. In Eregion, though they let Halbrand Sauron through the gate, they tell him that he's not welcome, that he should leave. Though if they didn't want him there, you wonder why they let him in the first place. Anyway, Celebrimbor says he won't deal with Halbrand again because he promised Galadriel he wouldn't. But Halbrand Sauron waits him out, until against his promise and his better judgment, he goes to talk with Halbrand Sauron anyway. And of course, Sauron manages to trick Celebrimbor into working with him again. He does this by telling the Smith that he's actually one of the Valar, celestial beings that some on Middle-earth revere for their godlike powers. Sauron quickly deceives Celebrimbor by walking through the flames of the forge, changing his appearance, and he now looks like Halbrand but with a blonde wig and elf ears. Anyway, the two get ready to start work on more rings. Lastly, we catch up with the dwarves. An earthquake caused by black tendrils spreading out from Mount Doom causes the light shafts to collapse at Khazad-dûm, casting it into darkness, which will make it hard for the dwarves to grow food. Worse still, Disa and the other female dwarves who like to sing to the rock can't do their singing thing anymore. The mountain isn't talking to them, and they don't know where to dig to fix the light problem. And Disa thinks she knows why, because after King Durin III stripped Durin IV of his position, the two haven't spoken. Durin and Disa live in the slums, trying to make a living however they can. Disa thinks this separation is why the mountain won't sing back to the dwarves anymore, and she talks to both the king and her husband, trying to get them to put aside their foolish pride and reconcile. This episode ends with a summons from Celebrimbor, calling the dwarves to Eregion. Why it's sent to Durin IV, who isn't in a position of leadership anymore, I don't know, but it's clearly things are kicking into high gear here, indicating this season won't spend 2/3 of its episodes dithering about before getting to actual plot. And that is episode 2. The problems continue to multiply as we suspected. The supposed good guys are almost all arrogant, selfish, and deluded into thinking they are far more capable than they are. Without much reason given, they trample over sound arguments in pursuit of something we as an audience know will lead to their destruction. In Lord of the Rings, this prideful self-indulgence is displayed by characters like Saruman and Denethor, but they are unequivocally antagonists. They are in the wrong. To have those we are supposed to side with, to root for, display this same kind of moral foolishness does not work very well. The only exception so far has been Elrond, who has stood firm on his principles and has called out the threat. I fear this won't last, and Elrond will be compromised at some point, but for now he's just about the only good thing this season has going for it. I'm going to cover episodes 3 and 4 together next week, and then I'll be doing one episode at a time after that. And remember, all of this is just one Rebel's opinion. What do you think of Lord of the Rings Season 2 so far? Let me know in the comments. Leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you'll always get the latest updates from Rebel Normal.